Across the Straits of Gibraltar, the first migration of anatomically modern Europeans into Western Europe. Phylogenetic evidence indicates that the first European farmers carried haplogroup N1. The N haplogroup probably originated in Africa and expanded from the Great Lakes region of East Africa into West Africa 80,000 years ago, and into Iberia 40,000 years ago. The archaeological and genetic evidence indicate that although there were changes in the material culture of European hunter-gatherer groups and European farmers, there was probably continuity between the hunter-gatherer population and the farming groups of Europe. It is clear that Cro-Magnon man never lived in the Middle East until after they migrated to the area from Iberia. The archaeological and genetic evidence indicates that Cro-Magnon man originated in Africa, migrated into Europe across the Straits of Gibraltar between 45,000 and 35,000 BC into Iberia, and then moved eastward into Eastern Europe and the Middle East, where they slowly replaced the Neanderthal population. Using archaeological, craniometric, anthropological, and samples of H&MTD DNA, we can positively show that there was a migration of sub-Saharan Africans from North Africa across the Straits of Gibraltar into Eurasia. These African people introduced what's called the Aurignacian culture. This was taken to Europe by the Khoisan people. Between 125,000 and 60,000 years before the present, anatomically modern humans left Africa and settled other parts of the world. Scientists believe there were probably two major migrations out of Africa. The first migration probably involved anatomically humans crossing the Red Sea and moving along the coast into India, and from there entering other parts of Eurasia on up the coast into East Asia and Southeast Asia on into Australia. This is called the coastal migration event. The second migration that archaeologists believe happened probably involved modern humans entering Eurasia from North Africa and the Levant between 20 to 10,000 years ago. The most recent common ancestor for the populations making these migrations probably belong to haplogroup L3 MN lineages. Most researchers have assumed that haplogroup L3MN was probably carried to Western Europe via the Levant. But the archaeological and craniometric evidence indicates that the Levant was still occupied by Neanderthal man until 32,000 years ago. Clearly, the dates for this lineage in Western Eurasia are incongruent to the most recent common ancestor of the populations carrying the L3MN lineages into Eastern Eurasia, which probably date to around 60 to 65,000 years ago. This incongruence in relation to the dates for this haplogroup in Eastern Eurasia and its complete absence in much of Western Eurasia today suggests that the population carrying this gene into Eurasia may not have entered Eurasia during the two recognized out-of-Africa events. This suggests that there was probably an alternative origin for anatomically modern humans in Western Eurasia, instead of the coastal and Levant out-of-Africa events. In this film, we will review the evidence that there was a third migration out of Africa across the Straits of Gibraltar into Iberia during the Paleolithic. Louis Pericot was sure that the populations associated with the ancient Iberian cultures, the Gravidian and Celtrian, were phylogenetically sub-Saharan African. The N lineage is believed to have entered Eurasia via the continental route out of Africa. This hypothesis has been disputed by some researchers because haplogroup N is found in India and Australia. This has led to some researchers assuming that there was a single migration of haplogroups M and N out of Africa. Haplogroup N originated in Africa. There was a serial expansion of haplogroup N across Africa into Eurasia. This haplogroup probably originated in East Africa near the Great Lakes region around 93.4 thousand years ago. From Tanzania, Khoisan people probably spread the haplogroup into Ethiopia 80,000 years ago and into West Africa 40,000 years ago. These Khoisan in West Africa probably first lived in Cameroon, and from Cameroon they moved into the Senegambian region, and from the Senegambian region migrated up across North Africa and across the Straits of Gibraltar into Iberia. The Khoisan speakers probably spared the Aurignacian culture throughout Europe. As a result of the early demic diffusion of haplogroup N across Africa, before the first anatomically modern humans exited Africa 60,000 years ago, N haplogroups are found throughout Africa. Haplogroups N, N1, and N1A are found in sub-Saharan groups including Senegambians, Tanzanians, and modern Ethiopians. Carriers of haplogroup N in Africa speak various languages including Khoisan, Cushitic, Niger-Congo, Afrasian, and Nilo-Saharan. In East Africa, we find that 85.5% of the sub-Saharan African population carry N1 clades, while 14.5% carry one of the N sub-haplogroups in West Africa. In Egypt, 8.8% of the Gurma carry haplogroup N1b. The Great Lakes region of East Africa was the center for the spread of haplogroup N across Africa. As a result, it is not surprising to find that African N1A, the conjugal DNA haplotypes minus 1600, include 147G, 172, 223, 248 to 355 in Tanzania and Ethiopia. These mtDNA haplotypes are also found in Saudi Arabia, Greece, Russia, and Yemen. The South Indian mtDNA N1A haplotype minus 1600 include 147G, 172, 223, 248, 295, 355, and 147G, 172, 209, 23, 248, 355. Until recently, it was assumed that the earliest dates for haplogroup N were in Eastern Eurasia. This view has changed recently as a result of the extraction and examination of ancient mtDNA from Cro-Magnon skeletons dating to the Aurignacian period. The archaeological evidence indicates that anatomically modern humans replaced Neanderthal during the Aurignacian period in Europe, around 32,000 to 35,000 years ago. The Aurignacian civilization appears to have expanded from west to east. The founders of the Aurignacian culture came from Africa. Some researchers have argued that the Aurignacian culture was introduced to Europe from Africa. They base this conclusion on the fact that the toolkit was foreign to the Mousterian type, and the culture appears in a mature form throughout Europe from France to Central Europe. The Cro-Magnon DNA found in the ancient skeletons dates back to the Aurignacian period. This period, the skeletons are called Cro-Magnon. This makes it clear that the Cro-Magnon skeletons belong to the N haplogroup. It appears that haplogroup N was the most frequent mtDNA carried by Western European populations for over 20,000 years. This gene, as discussed earlier, is found primarily today outside Western Europe. The Cro-Magnon people were mainly hunter-gatherers. Hack et al., who has also done research on ancient mtDNA, found that the 24 samples of ancient Europeans included haplogroups H, V, T, K, J, N1A, and U3. The frequency of N1A among ancient samples ranged from 8% to 42%. Hack et al. Found that the first Neolithic farmers did not have a strong genetic influence on modern European female lineages. These researchers found that the farmers were predominantly haplogroup N1A. This is interesting because Brace et al. Found that the craniofacial features of these early European farmers and the Natufians plotted with sub-Saharan groups, just like the Aurignacians. The existence of haplogroup N in Western Europe from 24,000 to 7,500 years ago shows continuity between the Pleistocene and Neolithic Western Eurasians who carried haplogroup N. The craniofacial evidence makes it clear that the Levantines and Aurignacian people came from Africa. As a result, we find that the craniofacial features of the Grimaldi Cro-Magnon population, and especially the Natufian population, when plotted, fall within the range of sub-Saharan populations, like the Niger-Congo speakers. The archaeological evidence indicates that anatomically modern humans replaced Neanderthal during the Aurignacian period in Europe between 32,000 and 35,000 years ago. The Aurignacian civilization appears to have expanded from west to east. The founders of this culture came from Africa. Some researchers have argued that the Aurignacian culture was introduced from Africa. They base this conclusion on the fact that the two kits are similar. By 40,000 BC, Europe was occupied mainly by Neanderthals. They began to be replaced in Europe around 32,000 by the Cro-Magnon or Khoisan people. They first left their colonies throughout Iberia and France. One of the most important sites of the Cro-Magnon people was Les Ezes in France. It is also evident that archaic humans were replaced in much of the Levant by the Levantine Aurignacian culture barriers, by a local variant of this technology found at Qasr Aqil 13 through 7. Qasr Aqil dates back to only 32,000 years ago, not 50 to 60,000 years ago. This shows a recent introduction of anatomically modern human beings in Western Eurasia. The Cro-Magnon DNA found in the ancient skeletons dates back to the Aurignacian period. The Cro-Magnon skeletons belong to the N haplogroup. The Cro-Magnon skeletons carry many of the N groups that we find today. The Cro-Magnon people were the first modern humans. The ancient European farmers matched sub-Saharan African populations. These European farmers failed to share haplogroups found among contemporary Europeans. As a result, the ancient DNA found among these people is DNA of the African people who replaced Neanderthal. There have been numerous Africoid skeletons found in Europe. Marceline Boulet and Henri Vallas in Fossil Man provide an entire chapter on the Africans Negroes of Europe. Anton Diop has also discussed the Negroes of Europe and civilizational barbarism. We also find that W. Du Bois, he discussed these Negroes in The World in Africa. Du Bois noted that there was once an uninterrupted belt of Negro culture from Central Europe to South Africa. Boilly and Vallas note that, to sum up, in the most ancient skeletons from the Grotte des Enfants, we have a human type which is readily comparable to modern types, and especially to the Negritic or Negroid type. They continue. Two Neolithic individuals from Chamblandes in Switzerland are Negroid, not only as regards their skulls, but also in the proportions of their limbs. Several Ligurians and Lombard tombs of the Middle Age have also yielded evidence of a Negroid element since the publication of Venus Memoire. Discoveries of other Negroid skeletons of Neolithic levels in Illyria and the Balkans have been announced. The prehistoric statues dating from the Copper Age from Sultan Silo in Bulgaria are also thought to portray Negroids. In 1928, René Bailly found in one of the caverns of Moniat, near Dinant in Belgium, a human skeleton whose age it is difficult to be certain, but seems definitely prehistoric. It is remarkable for its Negroid characters, which give it resemblance to the skeletons from both Grimaldi and Asillar. In Eurasia, Cro-Magnon man remained African. There were no Caucasians or Mongoloid people in Western Eurasia until probably after 5000 BC, if that early. The old Europeans were black African people. In fact, Diop dates the first skeletons associated with white Europeans to around 2000 BC. The whites probably remained in the mountainous areas of the Caucasus until after 2000 BC. Then people like the Hittites began to interact with Cushites in Anatolia. The Gutians and other Proto-Arabs already occupied the Middle East. Mongoloid people were on the rise in the East and East Asia, so the whites could only move westward into Central Asia and Europe. After 1500 BC, due to natural catastrophes in Western Europe, the white ancestors of the Indo-European speakers led by the Hittites began to invade Western Europe, while another element called the peoples of the sea invaded Southern Europe and the Middle East. I call these people of Europe African because they were brown-skinned people dissimilar to Mongoloid people and pale-skinned Caucasians who arrived in Europe after 2000 BC. In other words, we find in a sense that the archaeological evidence makes it clear that there was a third migration out of Africa across the Straits of Gibraltar into Iberia. And it was from Iberia that modern human beings began to expand and spread civilization in Western Europe.